Hello, I'm Marlene Saeed. This is Counting the Cost in Al Jazeera. This week, unprecedented flooding in Pakistan has left more than 1,100 people dead and has displaced millions. The government estimates damages of at least $10 billion, a blow to the already struggling economy. The race for the Arctic, global warming is causing ice sheets to shrink, opening up new shipping lanes and access to vast energy resources. That has increased geopolitical tensions as world powers try to tap into the region's economic potential. Also this week, Microsoft partners with Qatar to launch a global data center, the first in the region to develop digital capabilities and support innovation across industries. Stay with us as we look at the world of business and economics. We begin in Pakistan. The most devastating flooding in decades has left 1/3 of the country underwater and affected at least 33 million people. Entire villages are submerged. Roads, bridges and railway lines have been washed away and farmlands have been destroyed. Displaced Pakistanis need food and water, and the threat of water-borne diseases is growing. Well, the government says it could take up to 10 years for Pakistan to rebuild and repair its infrastructure. The planning minister says preliminary assessments suggest losses of at least $10 billion at a time when the economy is already struggling. More than 80 million hectares of crops have been destroyed. Agriculture is the biggest sector and contributes about 23% to Pakistan's GDP. Rivers have burst their banks and dams have overflowed, damaging more than 3,400 kilometres of road, railway, tracks and bridges, as well as homes, schools and clinics. Zain Basravi has this report from a village in Sindh province, one of the hardest hit regions.
This is the face of hunger in Sindh. To describe what is happening here as desperation trivializes the extent of the suffering. We spoke to Farzana as she was headed into the fray. She says she had no choice.
Our houses have fallen down. We don't have tents. We can't shade our children from the sun. Our houses have been submerged. I swear to God, there is nothing left. All our belongings have been washed away. We're poor, our children are sick. They are just sitting there.
Senior army officers leading this relief operation tell us their orders are use a light touch, help everyone. But making sure the weakest in the crowd, women, children, the sick and elderly, don't get pushed to the back of the line, often requires force.
The army's arrived at this village with much-needed humanitarian supplies, food mostly, and there's been a scramble at the supply truck because people here know that there is not enough for everyone. But they are still the lucky ones. Here across the way, where the road has been completely washed away, are people cut off from other villages, and they are just hoping that someone is able to swim some supplies over to them.
Who is the most deserving? Who should go first? Seems to be an impossible decision.
There is no reason to worry. God willing, everyone will get something, okay? But calmly, wait your turn, and everyone will get help.
Reassurances bring peace, but only briefly. As the trucks begin to empty, panic returns, and people jump the queue once again. Flood survivors say, not to do so is to choose death.
If we don't get food, we'll just eat dirt and die. What else can we do?
I don't have any bread. I don't have any water. All the children are starving.
Bringing order to the chaos caused by floods is an unenviable task, and one that has only just begun.
To take a more in-depth look at the consequences of the floods on the Pakistani economy, I'm joined now from Islamabad by Amar Habib Khan, who is the Group Chief Risk Officer at Qatar's Pakistan Financial Services. Thank you for your time, sir. Pakistan's planning minister said this week that early estimates put the damage from the floods at more than $10 billion. If that estimate is correct, how devastating a blow is that for its economy?
So that is a fairly early estimate. We expect something around $20 to $25 billion to be the total economic cost once the water recedes, once the dust settles, and we can really see what has really happened. Right now, what's happening is because the roads and the infrastructure is all broken, large tracts of Sindh and Balochistan, which are the hardest hit provinces, are underwater. It's not even possible to take relief goods to the hardest hit areas. So it will take time before we truly understand the gravity of the situation and the economic cost. If we have to assign a number to it, I would say it needs to be at least $20 billion, if not more.
So double that estimate. We know that agriculture makes up 23% share of the country's GDP. More than 80 million hectares has already been destroyed of onions, tomatoes, rice, other crops. What kind of impact is that likely to have?
That is going to have a fairly massive impact on economic growth, as well as overall inflation, and more importantly, food security. Now, what's happening here is the rain struck Sindh, which basically was growing at this point in time rice and cotton. Now, rice, we are a major exporter of rice. So what's going to happen is we won't be able to export rice. There will actually be a shortage of rice in the country. So that will lead to increase in prices of rice. Similarly, a lot of condiments and vegetables, they have also been destroyed, including onions, tomatoes, which are essentially staple goods. That means higher prices for them. Prices for tomatoes and onions have increased by more than 100% over the last few days because the infrastructure is broken, the supply chains are broken, and it's not possible to take vegetables from one point of the country to another. That's why the government is really focusing on opening trade with India, such that we can import these essentials, these staples.
Let me pick you up on that point about importing, because Pakistan's economy was already struggling with a huge current account deficit, high inflation because of over-reliance on imports. And now, as you say, with so much of the food destroyed, they're going to have to import more. This couldn't have come at a worse time, could it, for the country's finances?
That is correct. This is possibly the worst time. The major damage actually happened on the day when the IMF program got through. So we're looking at additional deficit of around $5 to $6 billion in addition to the deficits that were there earlier, because as I said earlier, we won't be exporting a lot either, that's rice, but we will have to import additional food as well. So the balance of payments is going to be out. Lately, only a few hours back, we had the finance minister coming live on TV that we may go to the IMF again for another emergency facility, such that we can bridge the deficits required for importing food.
The IMF has agreed to give Pakistan, as you say, this lifeline of about just over $1 billion. If they hadn't received this tranche of money, was there a real concern that the country might even default?
No, it wouldn't have resulted in a default, because for a default to happen, you need to, let's say, not be able to pay money or pay back the bondholders or external debt holders. Pakistan has sufficient funds, or it had placed itself to ensure that it is able to pay off its external creditors. But that would have meant massive austerity in Pakistan, which would have meant significantly higher prices of food and everything else, and even rationing.
We've talked about the short-term needs, things like food, shelter, but there are, of course, the long-term needs once the floods go away, the rebuilding infrastructure. I mean, what kind of costs are we talking about?
We're looking at massive costs here. Just a rough estimate, we're looking at least $3 to $4 billion for just revamping the road network and building all the bridges that have been destroyed. So that's $4 billion of public capital, public money that needs to be reinvested to go back to a base case. Similarly, about 1 million houses have been destroyed, either fully or partially. Of that, those roughly 700,000 houses are in Sindh. So we're estimating roughly $6 to $7 billion of just reconstruction costs that would be from private capital. Now, these are people who are already fairly below the poverty line, most of them, and they have seen the land, they have seen their crop for the year completely gone to waste. So there is a severe capital crisis as well, as the private capital does not exist to really rebuild. And that's where I think the government is also going to step in and provide some kind of a facility to enable or support rebuilding of houses and infrastructure.
Pakistan suffered from similar devastating floods back in 2010. Were any lessons learned from that disaster?
Sadly, no lessons were learned from that disaster. We are still building houses. We are still building commercial establishments on riverbanks. We're still building, we're doing construction in areas which are prone to flooding. So there is a severe, I would say, lack of compliance with building code, with infrastructure guidelines, which eventually leads to such losses when floods come.
Really, really interesting to talk to Amar Habib Khan, Group Chief Risk Officer at Karandas Pakistan Financial Services. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we go to the North Pole. 8 countries border the Arctic Circle, and many of their territorial waters and exclusive economic zones overlap. Its harsh climate has been a natural barrier. But with the effects of climate change, warmer temperatures have made the region more accessible. And that is opening up a new front line in the battle for natural resources and maritime trade routes. Estimates vary, but about 13% of the world's untapped crude oil and a third of its undiscovered gas is hidden below the surface. And as ice sheets melt, they're presenting opportunities for energy companies to explore oil and gas reserves worth trillions of dollars. The Arctic is a major source of mineral deposits, vital to developments in science and technology. Rare earth elements are used in smartphones and computer hard drives, while platinum group metals like palladium have medical applications and are used in the manufacture of electronics like catalytic converters. And the icy waters are rich in plankton and fish stocks. The Arctic coastal states, China and the EU signed a treaty last year to prevent unregulated fishing in 2.8 million square kilometres of international waters. It aims to ensure that future fisheries in the central Arctic Ocean will operate sustainably. The northernmost region of the planet is warming up 4 times faster than the rest of the world and far more quickly than scientists had predicted. Research shows nearly 60% of the polar ice cap has disappeared in the past 40 years. This is opening up the Northwest Passage as a shortcut for shipping between Europe and Asia. Joining me now from the city of Tromsø in Norway is Mads Kvist Fredriksen. Mads is the Executive Director at the Arctic Economic Council, which is an independent organisation which represents industries in the Arctic region. Thank you for joining us, Mads. Now, the Arctic is quite different from other parts of the world. Many people might not be familiar with it. Can you tell us about its economy? What does it involve?
Traditionally, the Arctic region has been, a place for tourism, shipping for many years, and fishing. But it's changing. It's changing a lot these years. We have vertical farming. Satellite companies are looking north. Bio-innovation. But overall, you can say the Arctic region is the region of opportunities for many. Many
countries in the world are struggling with their energy needs at the moment. So how has the global demand for energy resources impacted your economy?
People are definitely looking north for many reasons, but also for energy reasons. Traditionally, we had this region has been one way or another energy exporter for many years, but in the past 50 years, it's mainly been oil and gas. And you have it in Alaska, you have it in northern Norway, and of course also Russia. Russia is heavily dependent on the oil and gas being produced and LNG being produced in the Arctic region. But let me say, it also has other energy sources. It also has renewable energy like geothermal in Iceland, wind in Finland, hydro in Norway, and even solar panels in small communities. But energy is definitely a big employer in the region, and it has a big economic impact for the communities there.
You mentioned Russia. The rich resources you're talking about have drawn rival countries like the US, Russia and China to compete for strategic influence in the Arctic. Is this a good thing or a bad thing for the Arctic's local economy?
More attention is always good for small regions. So we are a massive region when it comes to landmass, but we are just 4 million people. So the region has for many years been a poster boy for climate change and geopolitical challenges. And now we are also start seeing it as an economic opportunities, as I mentioned, like energy and fish. And it's also a home to many people. So people will like investments. People will like investments in infrastructure. And this attention that we see from countries like India, China, Japan, etc., that's a positive interest.
60% of the polar ice cap has disappeared in the past 40 years, which has opened up things like the Northwest Passage, which is this shortcut for shipping between Europe and Asia. How beneficial is that going to be?
I mean, those of us living in the Arctic, we are really the first to see and experience the problem of climate change. A recent report for some years back showed that global warming happens at 3 times the speed in the Arctic. And now most recent news is even 4 times, and some places even 7 times the global average. It has some opportunities in it, but also a lot of challenges. The challenges are like permafrost ruining infrastructures, new herding grounds for indigenous communities. But some of the opportunities is, as you mentioned, new shipping routes or new fishing areas. So what we have to be aware is we have to find a balance between, responsible and sustainable development. And we also have to remember that the global melting of glaciers in the north also affects the rest of the world.
It does indeed. So what can be done to stop this damage, and what is being done about it?
A lot is being done. I think the most important thing is we don't start punishing the people in the Arctic. Those 4 million people are not emitting all the CO2 that causes this climate change, but we definitely feel the impact. Looking at the positives, I think we should look at like development into hydrogen. So throughout the Arctic region, companies are investing in hydrogen because we have a lot of renewable energy. You can also see companies investing in battery production for electric vehicles. So we have to start looking at new technologies. We have to do some kind of energy transition. And also we also have to look at climate mitigation for those communities affected by the climate change.
How is the Arctic going to be able to help with demand for food?
I'm very glad you bring this up because I really think this is a perfect opportunity for the Arctic. Today, only 7% of the world's protein intake comes from seafood. And in the Arctic region, I mean, we are big landmass surrounded by water, and we have a lot of fish to feed the world. So, but we have to look at it's not only about the fish, but it's also using more of the fish. So countries like Iceland, countries like Norway are very, very far with bioinnovation, like using fish skins for pharmaceutical industries. Food security, if you want to talk about food security, you should definitely look up north and you should definitely look to all the opportunities.
What about tourism? You talked about how tourism has always been a staple for the Arctic, but surely it's now becoming even more accessible to people.
I think after the COVID, after the pandemic, a lot of people says, do I want to go to Paris, Berlin, or London, or do I want to go to the wilderness in North Norway where I live, for example? Do people want to go outdoor and experience the beautiful nature? And that's really what we have to offer. Like where I live, we have Northern Lights, we have whales outside, we have, perfect for skiing, you can ride a dog sledge and so on. We just have to be careful in these small, fragile communities that we don't get mass tourism. It has to be high-end tourism, and I'm sure we can get that.
One of the other issues we're seeing as the planet gets hotter and hotter is that people have to find somewhere else to live, and people are moving north. What opportunities can this part of the world provide for migration?
I mean, we love migration and immigration because, first of all, as I said, we are a massive area, but with only 4 million people. So we got plenty of space for more people. Some of the biggest challenges for the Arctic region is one is attracting more investments, and secondly is attracting people. So we have a demographic challenge. Like anywhere else in the world, there's urbanization. People are moving to the city, people are leaving the region. And we have, if you want to work with the green transition, if you want to work with hydrogen or battery production, you really have to move up north. And it's also a very easy place to move to. Apart from the climate can be difficult for some people.
Really interesting to talk to you. Mad Kvist Fredriksson, Executive Director of the Arctic Economic Council. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you for having me. Good day.
Here in Qatar, Microsoft has partnered with the Ministry of Transport and Communication to launch a cloud data center. It's expected to provide digital transformation opportunities for organizations and businesses in the region. The centre aims to establish Qatar as a digital innovation hub in line with its National Vision 2030. It's expected to add $18 billion to the economy in the next 5 years. It will also create 24,000 new jobs and reskill 15,000 people every year for future positions. The data center establishes Qatar as home to one of the largest cloud infrastructures in the world, serving more than 20 million businesses. Al Jazeera's Osama bin Javed was at the launch, where he met Lana Khalaf, country manager at Microsoft Qatar, and Hassan Jassim Al Sayed from the Ministry of Transport and Communications. Sayed tells us why Qatar needs a data center and how it will be beneficial.
Well, we are very happy to have our first data center over here, partnering with Microsoft. We believe in the Ministry of CIT that the data center is one of the building blocks that fosters the ICT development in country and accelerates, the digital transformation that we in the ministry as well as the country in general is heading to. So we think that the data center will bring a lot of benefits, both for the public sector in terms of accelerating the digital transformation, which in turn bring better efficiency, better services to the public, as well as the private sector, and building an ecosystem around the data center. So basically, the data center on its own will be to us a starting point that will allow other companies, whether local companies, to innovate, as well as to attract foreign investment in country.
Very quickly, so how does it work and how secure is that data going to be? Because if companies have not been going towards the digital transformation before, how will you convince them now?
Sure, definitely the security is an important matter for us, and we understand that there will be some worries about having especially the sensitive data put on a public cloud. So for that, we in the ministry, we have introduced in May this year a framework, a cloud security framework that protects these kind of data. And we are actually in the process of also introducing other legislations and policies to ensure all of this private information is kept secured in the cloud.
Whenever we think about data, we think about security. How secure is Microsoft's network and why should people trust it?
Thank you. First, definitely, the first thing for anyone to adopt any cloud technology out there is they need to trust it. And Microsoft runs on trust. We invest more than $20 billion. We have announced an investment of more than $20 billion on cybersecurity for the next 5 years. We have more than 100 global certifications on our cloud, more than any other cloud provider out there in the world. But also, we want to have not only the data residency, we also want to comply with the local policies and laws. And this is why we also are the only cloud provider today that we have acquired the NIA National Information Assurance Policy certification from the National Cybersecurity Agency in Qatar.
When we think of data centers, we don't think of data centers in the desert. It is going to require a lot of energy to keep it cool, as you know, that computers need to be cooled down. So why choose Qatar, and isn't that going to be detrimental for the environment and very cost heavy?
Microsoft data centers are built on the highest standards of sustainability in any country in the world. So definitely our data centers in Qatar will achieve for everyone 93% more energy efficiency and 98% more carbon efficiency than any other traditional data center today in Qatar.
So you're telling me that it is going to be more sustainable to have a data center in Qatar rather than having it somewhere in Europe or Central Asia?
We follow our sustainability standards globally. And actually, in Qatar, we're also taking some more measures on sustainability that you will soon hear about for Qatar, utilizing many of the assets that Qatar has, especially in the environment of Qatar. So definitely every country has its asset. Some has wind, some has solar, some has sun, some has others, but everybody and every country can contribute to sustainability and will be able for us to design a sustainable data center in any country around the world.
And that is our show for this week. Get in touch with us by tweeting me at Marlene Saeed, and do use the hashtag AJCTC when you do. Or drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. But there's more for you online on aljazeera.com/CTC. That's our website. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. That's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Marlene Saeed from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.